everyone, it is Vexed. I have literally done 13 introductions at this point, so let's pretend that none of that happened. We're going to just move on real quick. I'm here to do a video about what I've learned thus far in updating my webtoon, Console Her. That comic is roughly a romance, and my original intent with it was just to learn how to do panels, because I, for the life of me, have never ever been able to do shots, panels, any kind of camera angles, anything like that, because unfortunately, I think there's a term for it, I can't think of it right now, but you essentially don't have a very good visual, you can't see things in your head very well. You need, so for example, I can't see faces so well in my head. I can only really see people based on how I would draw them rather than what they actually look like. It's a very weird thing, and the more that I draw something, the more familiar I become with how it looks. I'm not very good at deciding what a camera angle is or anything like that. I can't picture, people just picture a movie in your head. That ain't it, chief. Can't do that. So me doing Console Her was all about me learning to just put stuff down and make it happen. And I begin, and each of my comics starts with roughly who is in this panel, who is in this comic, what needs to be conveyed, what needs to be foreshadowed, and then what is the end point, what does this comic need to end on. And that's how I approach each of my pages, is they start with that as a base concept. I know roughly where my comic is going to end up in terms of the first arc regarding Claudia and Ava's friendship, relationship, whatever you want to call it. I don't have it written out word for word. The reason that I don't do that personally is because I'm the artist and the writer, so I have control, and sometimes I will change I pretty much, even if I wrote a script, I would change the phrasing on pretty much everything every time. I've never written something and then had that go into the comic exactly the same way. It's always changed based on, I don't know, I'm so feeling based, and it's not professional at all, but hey, that's how I do. It's all about how I feel and how I feel looking at it, and it's very sculptural and very organic, my process. So as long as I meet those criteria of what is this comic about, who is in it, what needs to be conveyed, and what is the end point, as long as that is met, then I've met my requirement for myself on my comic. That has more or less been my process for all of the pages. I know roughly, again, that's sort of the problem that I am having with my process, is that I roughly know where things are going, and so sometimes I will freeze up because I'm like, well, how do I get there? Yeah. But I've always had that as a problem as a storyteller, is I know where things need to get to, but I'm not always the best at planning how they get there. So one of the major lessons that I have learned is just to do something, and you can always work from that. That's really one of the main points. And because normally I don't script my videos, I'm gonna do something very difficult, which is I've made a list on the side, and I'm gonna read each of the points, and then I'm gonna try and elaborate within reason and not take 7 hours to go on my rant. But if I forget anything, oh god, we'll get there. Alright, so the first thing I've written down is that you can always go back and fix issues. That is incredibly important, because for the first few pages, I was so, I want to say pedantic. I was so particular on how things were drawn, and even looking back, I'm still not happy with how they were drawn. And so it's kind of that whole thing that you can always keep reworking and redo. Everything can always be improved, and there has to hit a point where you just let it go and you just let it live. As long as it gets the point across that it needs to, that's all that matters. And so some panels might look a bit funky, and some might look a bit silly, and my consistency of characters is non-existent. Whoops, my bad. The fact that I'm doing a comic at all, to me, is fascinating and amazing. So my bar for myself is low, because if I had it high, I have very high expectations for myself, so I forcibly had to lower those expectations, otherwise I wouldn't do anything. So, point 2. There's I don't even know how many points, but we'll get there, it's fine. Point 2 is that the style of your comic may change. I guess this is sort of just a general guideline to webtoon and making comics in general. So like I said, I started my comic June last year, and it has been a year almost of me drawing these characters. My style has changed a lot, and there's still certain things that I'm not happy with. There's actually right now, I think it was roughly the shot where Claudia's I knew it. The way that I drew Claudia in that, I'm not happy with. It's too realistic, and that's something that I have as a problem in my art, is when I don't know how to draw something, I'll default to what I know a face kind of looks like from that angle. So it doesn't look like the character, but it doesn't look bad, but it doesn't look like the character. And the first comic compared to this one, I had a massive change of style. Like I put line art on it, and I very much simplified down how I colored backgrounds, because massive thing for me in this comic is, I don't know if it's bad or mean. I guess it doesn't matter. The backgrounds don't have feelings, but I don't care about the background. I really don't. And when I used to read comics, I used to be really judgmental of like people's backgrounds, because I'd be like, oh my god, the background's like not even that detailed. But who cares about the background? Unless it's like that's the appeal of the comic. Unless you have to pick what the appeal of your comic is. For me, five shrug emojis. I don't know what the appeal is. No, I do. Like, it's very cute characters, but the backgrounds aren't what people come to my comic for. And given the nature of Webtoon and how fast you have to work, backgrounds just aren't, that ain't it, chief. Like, you can't spend hours. I mean, you can for certain, and people do. People are very talented. But for me, unfortunately, if I was to do backgrounds in my comic in a detailed way, I would never ever finish, and it would be trash. It would be bad. So I use SketchUp, I make a line art, and then I color it in a very impressionist way, in a way that suits the scene. Colors are a big thing for me. I really like colors, and I have a effects layer that comes into it later, which balances all the colors out, makes everything pop and bright, because I don't know, I just like that. I also have a color guide for all the characters, and I tend to recycle the colors that I like. So Claudia has like her colors, and Ava has her colors and stuff, and for sure eventually they'll deviate more, but for the most part I keep it limited. I've only done 2 points thus far, and I'm like 7 minutes into the video. Okay, let's continue. Not everyone is going to like your comic, and that's something that I had to learn pretty severely, because I posted an update that I was super happy with, and I had like a rating of like 9.8 or something like that, and then it dropped down to like 9.4, and I was really upset because no, it was like 9.04, and I like stopped. I just was like, I'm not doing this anymore. I don't want to do comics anymore. I hate this, because I just couldn't handle the fact that someone had downvoted my comic. But that is just the nature of the beast, and I've learned a lot by doing the comic, so it doesn't really matter what people think. I mean, it does matter what people think, but this is into my next point. Do what makes you happy, and listen to others, but not to the detriment of your own work. So it's good to listen to other people's feedback, but don't let that influence you to the point where you're making something you don't like anymore. Another important thing to do is to read comics and to watch videos on the topic of comics, because there's lots of things that you can learn by doing, but there's also some things that are worth watching tutorials about. Learning by doing is honestly the best way to learn, because by doing the action of making comics, you learn where your shortcomings are, you learn what you're not so good at. I was not very good at poses and bodies and stuff, and so that kind of made me realize what I needed to work on. Character interactions is a massive thing. I find it really hard to draw two characters believably together. Something I'm working on. I'm trying to make myself draw what I'm bad at in my comic, so that I can learn by doing. It's important. You need to know your character's wants and needs, and find a way to put believable roadblocks in the way of them getting what they want. Because if a character gets something too easily, it is not engaging to watch. Like, if someone just keeps getting what they want on repeat with no challenge whatsoever to themselves, that's not interesting. By the inverse, if somebody is constantly struggling and you have to throw in like god tier ex machina, changing the universe to suit that character, that kind of stuff, like when you have to break the narrative to service your character getting what they want, that's also not good. So you don't want to set the expectation, you don't want to make it too difficult for them to get something, but you also don't make it too easy. You want to have a bit of give and take. You want to introduce something new while you resolve something old. It's a lot of give and take in narrative, especially if it's an ongoing thing. You should try and keep an idea of setting things up and foreshadowing things. For example, I didn't necessarily intend to have Trevor make an appearance at that point in the comic. In the most recent update, her ex-boyfriend so she basically broke up with the dude on Instagram. Yeah, so she posted a picture of herself and this new guy and her ex-boyfriend was really confused and cornered her on a street. And that actually added some tension that I needed to the story. It added a moment for Ava and Claudia to be closer, and I foreshadowed that actually in, I believe, the second or third page, where I actually had Trevor posting a comment being like, what the heck? So it's good to put in little elements for yourself as a story, and this is maybe seem like a cop-out, but it's good to put in, like, sprinkle in breadcrumbs and then leave that later for yourself to pick up. It's actually something people do in D&D a lot. It's a narrative method. Oh my gosh, a narrative method that is good to make the world feel like it's more dense than it actually is, and it doesn't actually require you to write anything at the time. It does offer you a chance to build on it later. That said, you don't want to do it too often, and I actually have a list of all the running unresolved plot elements that I can bring in if I need to, because the thing with webcomics and webtoons is that it's like a television show where it could go on. Some stories have a very set arc narrative, it's very structured, very strict, but the way that I do it is a lot more fluid, and so there is that room for, like, you could introduce a new thing later on, and then it like leads back. And having Ava as a voice actress was also something that I revealed. There's like allusions to it in the previous pages. It's good to be more strict, I suppose, on it. It's good to be have like more of an outline of how that's going to work, but by the same time, I'm just doing this for fun. It's not like a formal thing, and I can always, like I said, go back and fix things if they don't quite make sense, and like I'm kind of just going with it and enjoying myself. And from my experience doing D&D, it's like a good thing to do. It's just to have narrative threads that you can pick up on and have callbacks previously. You don't want to do that too often, but it's not a bad idea to just foreshadow elements. If you do have a strict guideline or a strict narrative, you can still do that. But yeah, I just have like a loose guideline of things, and again, I really do need to sit down and break it down, but I think if I made it too strict, I would not want to keep doing it, because I need a little bit of like pantsing. I need a little bit of breathing room for my stories. Some further notes that I have, and I feel like I'm spending too long on each point, so I might try and rush through them as much as possible, but subtlety is hard but important. So sometimes people will be too over the top with how they portray something, but some of the most effective storytelling methods can just be someone like crying. Like you can show something quite easily without the characters sitting down and being like, oh my god, I'm so sad, I'm gonna cry so much. Like you could just have them crying. Sometimes that can have more of an impact because it's less heavy-handed, more subtle. It doesn't matter how fast you go, just keep going. That's an important thing that I've learned, is that I've had 2 major hiatuses thus far whilst doing the comic, and it's not good, but it's also not my full-time job. I've got Beyond You that's going on, and prior to that, I had a breakup, so that was kind of hard, and that kind of took it out of me for a little while. But yeah, it's more about just going for to keep going and keep trying to make the thing that you want to make, and you haven't failed and you haven't hurt anyone by not continuing. Like, it's certainly like disappointing sometimes when someone takes a break, but don't let those vocal few who make it into the end of the world because you've stopped make you feel like you can't return. And I've never had anyone, thus far everyone's been very supportive of me if I have had to take a hiatus, so don't feel like people are gonna absolutely tear you apart for doing it. It's good if you let people know it's going to happen, but at the same time, sometimes people don't want to make an update just to say I'm not going to be around. Like, that can sometimes be not well received, so I just kind of slink away and update my social medias. I don't know, there's no right way to do that, unfortunately, and I don't feel like I don't have the best advice for that. If you're getting paid, it's a totally different story, but if it's just a hobby like it is for me at the moment, make sure you're taking care of yourself. And from what I understand, even if you are featured on Webtoon, as long as you tell them up in advance that you need a hiatus or you need time, then they usually work around you, from what I understand. There's lots of posts and forums out there of people discussing their experiences being featured. I'm just on the Discover page. Though I have been on Staff Pick and Hot Today a couple of times, so I have had like algorithm-based features, and I think the staff pick is custom picked by the staff, but I don't have any confirmation of that. Just little things, have a character profile for each character, like height, favorite color, favorite movie, foods, background information, anything like that. Just have something like that for anyone who's a major character, because it means you can bring in information just on the fly, and you can have little subtle nods to that if it's relevant. Like, you might do something in the comic and be like, oh, this person likes this, so they'd have this reaction, that kind of thing. Have a distinct color for each character, even if they change clothes. This is not necessarily required. I just think it's more of just a personal preference thing, because a lot of my background is in like television and that kind of thing. Like, I'm thinking Totally Spies and Kim Possible, but generally you should be able to pick a character base quite quickly. It's good to have like a distinct color for each character. That's what I like to do. I like to have a specific color for each character. That's not always possible It's not a requirement, but it's just something that I think is like a neat artistic flair. Definitely not a requirement, but it's good to make them identifiable at a glance. Oh my gosh, people read so fast. Like, you'd be surprised. Like, when you're like scrolling through a comic or reading the comic, the speed at which I've read comics is absolutely disgusting, because someone will spend an hour on one panel and you will literally read it in like 2 seconds at most, which is incredibly important to note. Not that I wrote this down, but sometimes, oh, actually I think it's a later point. Let the panel size dictate how much time you spend on it. If something is like a big, beautiful shot of like a character, then spend a lot of time on it. But if it's like a little throwaway shot of them giving a side glance or something like that, it's not always necessary to put all of your effort in. And sometimes you do need to allocate time wisely, because you can't, it's impossible to put the same amount of attention and care in a week, when you have a timeline of a week, when you're trying to do an update on Webtoon, unless you've got like a massive backlog and you can take your time. But generally, if you're trying to make a webcomic for Webtoon, you need to know where you can make those sacrifices for your own sake, because if you are putting 110% into every single panel, you are gonna lose your, like, you're gonna either injure yourself, or you're gonna like just lose passion in it, like, or lose, like, you can't, it's not sustainable, unfortunately. And a lot of people who are, I feel as though it's not appreciated enough, that some people might have one panel that maybe doesn't look 100%, and someone will be like I haven't seen anyone make fun of people for that, but I feel that people, unless you've like made a comic or you've been in that kind of timeline, it is like very hard to do top tier work every single panel all the time. So just know where you can afford to not do poorly, but just invest your time into the panels that you know are going to matter the most. And then the reader will literally read it in like 5 seconds. Like, some panels they'll look out for, like, they'll literally glance over it. So don't feel like every single panel matters the same amount, because unfortunately that's not how it works. Use the format to your advantage. So if you're doing Webtoon, it's a scrolling format. I've seen a lot of people who upload their comics as a straight page, and sometimes they just do that as uploading on the side to Webtoon. Like, they don't intend to become featured or anything like that, and I don't think it's a requirement per se. I'm not 100% on the actual mechanics of what is required, but I know that a lot of comics are adapted into that long form scrolling format because you're on a mobile and it reads differently and the pacing is different. Usually with comics, it's one set page and you have to consider the layout of the whole page. I think it's better to consider with Webtoon how it feels to scroll through it. And there's some beautiful shots of like skies with birds and leaves, and you scroll through it and you can see like the journey of like a leaf through the page or like a bird through the page, and it's very beautiful and it's very engaging. So just know that that kind of counts as a panel. Any time that the reader is engaged with your comic is a panel. So don't feel like every single panel has to be a character's face, I say, with my comic being mostly faces. But sometimes you can just play with the format and do artistic effects and things. One of my favorites is Lore Olympus. I also started reading Eggnoid, and they have some really beautiful shots, and I really enjoyed their comic. Learn when to fix things and when to let things go. I already kind of covered that before, but essentially don't feel like you have to spend an equal amount of time on every single panel. Sometimes you just do a pass at it, and if it's good enough, then keep going and put the time in where it matters. Do the backgrounds before you do any final line art, because if you're doing backgrounds, it's a lot easier to put a character into a background rather than make the background fit around the character, because generally if you're just drawing a character, it's hard to imagine the perspective that they're in. So if you've got the background, that will inform you of the perspective, and putting figures into perspective is a whole thing, and it's very hard to make backgrounds fit after the fact. I've done that so many times where I've drawn a character and I've tried to make them fit into the background. Doesn't work. You need to put the background in and then make the character fit that. It's a lot easier. And I think the final one, I mean, I guess this is kind of final but not, is with regards to doing hands, just go for it. Just draw as many hands as you can manage on a body, ideally 2. If you want to do more, go for it. But the best thing that I've learned through doing this comic is how to draw hands. I'm so much better at doing hands already, because if I can, I always include the hand in some way, because people are so hard pressed to draw hands sometimes, and it's interesting seeing the different ways you can stylize them, or the ways you can make them look more realistic or whatever, but like it's very important that you don't just make the hand, like you don't hide the hands in every single panel. If you don't want to draw them, whatever, don't draw them, but I definitely think by making myself draw particular things, I've gotten better at doing that. So I highly recommend using the comic as an excuse to get better at drawing hands, and in general at getting better at a lot of things in your drawings and your art. I just want to take a moment at the end to say that I have definitely had my art change a lot in the process of making the comic. If you compare the first page to the one now, it's very different, and I've got different priorities in terms of how I've drawn things, and I definitely know that at some point I have to go back and redraw the first few pages because it was a totally different style. It was lineless, which I highly respect, but I'm no good at. But I definitely don't regret changing the style, because the way that I do it now is a lot faster, and I thought it would be a lot easier to do loose sketches and then okay, my original plan was to do loose rough pencils and then do a color over the top and then be like, sweet, done. I thought that was gonna be so much easier, but honestly I've learned that doing line art is actually easier for me. I'm hoping eventually it'd be better if I could do like just straight that kind of storybook colors only, no line art style, but that doesn't really work for me, unfortunately. But yeah, that's sort of my big old rant about what I've learned doing webtoons thus far. I've had a really good experience with it. I've had a lot of fun. I've made 10 pages of a comic, which is generally the point at which I totally ditched the comic that I'm working on. It's happened twice before. So fingers crossed it doesn't happen again, because I'm not ready for that kind of loss again. Oh my gosh, please. Come on, Sarah, let's work on this together. Let's get this together. And I hope that something that I've said in this video has resonated with you and gives you motivation to keep working. Just identify what's important to you, what matters to you, what you want to draw, and what you want to be known for. That kind of rhymed, was an accident, wasn't intentional, but that's the truth of it. Just do what makes you happy, and especially because making a webtoon is, there's comments, you get people leaving comments, which is really nice, and occasionally you get fan art, that's pretty cool. But it's kind of thankless. It's very much, you have to motivate yourself to do it. And some people make hundreds of pages and they don't necessarily, quotation marks, get anything out of it. So it's really up to you what you get out of it, I suppose. Like, it's up to you to find what value there is in it for you. And that's, yeah, it's really on you and what you want to learn. And don't feel discouraged from it. It's not as difficult as it seems, and I highly recommend that you try out making one. Maybe even if you do a slice of life one, or if you've already got a comic, just keep going with it, I guess. Leave me a comment below if you have a comic yourself, and feel free to ask questions or ask for clarification on any points that I made. This video ended up being like twice the length that I thought it was going to be, and I'm really anxious about refilming it or anything like that, because it took me literally like 15 tries to actually start this video, and I don't know why it was so hard. Usually I'm pretty confident and I can go straight for it, but today I'm very aware of my shortcomings with my comic and what I need to work on, but I'm not going to let that stop me from working on it. I'm going to keep trying and going with it and making it, because I've had an incredible response from the community. I get like almost 80 or 90 comments a comic, and I try and respond to everyone, so it ends up being like, it looks like more than it actually is. But it's been really fun, and I'm really excited to see where it goes, and I'm hoping that I can be a big girl and sit down and write the plot out and have a set list of episodes and what they're going to be about, because that's the next thing I really need to do, is actually be more structured in my planning. And I highly recommend you do that. Don't do what I'm doing. Don't just make it and go for it and YOLO, but also don't not make it. So don't overplan, but don't underplan. Don't make excuses not to start. And once you do start, please try and come up with a plot, because I should have done that, and I know where it's going, but yeah. Okay, cool. Alright, this has been like 20. It's been a really long video. Alright, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video, which won't be ideally it'll be a short video, hopefully. Hopefully. Oh, wait. I am going to do something really quickly, if that's okay with you. Alright, I just want to say thank you to my patrons thus far. Becca, Ben, Dakota, Kieran, and Kimberly. There's a lot of B's, D's, and K's there. B to K. But yeah, if you want to be in the little shout out at the end of the video, then feel free to donate. I only have like 2 tiers at the moment. One is a $10 sketch tier and the other is a $1 tier. The $1 tier gets you access to everything. It's more of like a tip jar / like a thank you kind of thing. And again, it gets you access to being in the end screen of things. I may change that in future, but for the moment, that's all I can really manage. Yay, okay. This has been a weird video, energy-wise. I feel like I'm dying, but we're here we go. Alright, cool. Bye. It's been HexVexed. This is a fucking garbage fire.